Did get quiet. Can everyone hear me?
No, it's not on. It's for recording purposes only.
Oh, okay, so I have to boom. Yeah. Okay. Well, we might as well get started. I want to say, first and foremost, welcome to the Food Studies course, an interdisciplinary approach to what, why, and how we eat. As you all know, and as you can tell from the very expectant faces of the people in this room, this is a completely unique first of its kind course, which we are very, very excited about. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in a second. I wanted to first introduce myself. My name is Laurie Patton. I'm the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Duke University. I'm also a professor of religion. If you get an email from me, you will see that professor of religion is first, and Dean of Arts and Sciences is second. That's because I see my work as coming entirely from who I am as a teacher and a scholar. And so my life mission is never to become a suit. We will see how long that lasts, but we'll do our best. I also want to say that, and give credit to my colleagues from the university from which I came, Emory University. We had a pilot version of this class at Emory last year, in which the topic was a book by Nick Redding called Meth Land, which is about the use of meth in a small Iowa town. And it was a really interesting course. It was a group of 25 students. And what happened at Duke is what I now call a Duke moment, when suddenly you have an idea and people are ready to run with it, and it morphed into a 100-person class. Incredible enthusiasm from you all. Incredible enthusiasm from my administrative and arts and sciences faculty colleagues, and here we are in this room today. So, welcome. What we are looking at across the board today is students and faculty from Trinity, Pratt, Nicholas, Fuqua, Divinity, Law, Medicine, Nursing, and Sanford, all of whom are people coming together to learn from each other and to talk to each other about an issue of common concern. That seems kind of like a simple thing to say, but it's really unusual that we would gather together for a single course for credit for this very reason, and that's exactly what we're doing. I also want to say that generally speaking, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, universities tend to be multiversities today, not universities. They tend to be very interesting communities that are siloed, that are in little smaller communities with fences around them. And it takes a huge effort on the part of many different people and a lot of money and enticements with food, among other things, to break down those silos. And that's essentially what we're trying to do today. But in order for us to do that well, we need your help. And so we want to welcome you to this grand experiment that isn't an elite seminar of 25 people, but something much bigger and greater than that. And I'm really looking forward to starting on the experiment. Before I talk a little bit more about the spirit of the course and the 5 principles of the course that I want to share with you today, I wanted to introduce the people behind this grand experiment, who you're going to be hearing a lot more from throughout the class. The first is Professor Kathy Rudy, who's a professor in the Women's Studies program, and she has training in ethics, religious ethics, sexuality, and feminist theory, and has a wonderful history also of teaching and writing about animals. and also has taught extensively in food studies. When we decided to float this class, Kathy came right up and said, let's do it. Here are my thoughts. How do we make it work? And we went from there. And particularly because her new work focuses on animals and ethics, nature, food politics, ecology, and so on, she's really going to be a really wonderful resource for the most current debates around food studies and animals and ecofeminist perspectives, ecological perspectives. So I take introductions very seriously, so please join me in welcoming I want to introduce our next guiding spirit, Charles Thompson, who is an author, teacher, filmmaker, and lecturer in the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University, and also in cultural anthropology. Charlie has worked at UNC, Chapel Hill. He has a degree in religious studies and also an MA in religious studies. He also has an MS in agricultural education, and he has BA in sociology and religion. So you can see he really brings an educational background that's fantastic for this class. While he's running the certificate program in documentary studies, he happens to have written 4 books and produced 3 documentary films, just on the side, apparently. And many of them are about things like communities like the Old German Baptist Brethren, on faith, farming, and change in the Virginia Blue Ridge, spirits of just men, mountaineers, liquor bosses, and lawmen in the moonshine capital of the world. I don't think that our next university course is going to be about the moonshine, but if Charlie were to teach it, it could be. He's also done, so the documentary films have looked at Latin American communities, guest worker communities, and history of resettlement farms. So really interesting, wonderful work. Charlie, as you probably know, is a fabulous teacher and great university citizen. And I love his website. If you go to his website, it says, "Welcome to my website. Here are the things you might want to learn." And kind of goes from there. So please join me in welcoming One of the great joys of coming to Duke and one of the great draws was my interview now many years ago, it feels like only about a year ago, with the Vice President for Student Affairs, Laurie, Bonita, who is joined Duke in 2001 after nearly 10 years at the University of Pennsylvania. He has responsibility for a variety of services and programs that support undergraduate, graduate, and professional students, housing, healthcare, career services. And he is also has an appointment in the Stanford School of Public Policy's Heart Leadership Program and the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania, where he teaches in the Higher Education Executive Doctorate Program. He's written numerous publications. He presents frequently at professional meetings and serves on a number of corporate boards. He's an incredibly thoughtful interlocutor around questions in higher education. He's a wonderful entrepreneur around thinking about how we redo West Virginia in terms of food studies. And as we were thinking about this class, Larry said, why don't we incorporate food into the whole experience? And we went from there. I just want to note that it is a very rare occasion when someone of Larry's stature in the university joins into the educational enterprise. It's one of the things that Duke is particularly special about, is that we don't really have administrators, we have scholar leaders in the best sense. So Larry's hiding up there, but if you could please welcome. I also am delighted to welcome a colleague of mine who I have feel like I've been through the wars with and back already. Lee Baker. I introduced Lee in late August, and it's always a delight to do so. As you probably know, he's the Dean of Academic Affairs of Trinity College, and Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, and a Professor in Cultural Anthropology and Sociology and African American Studies. He did his undergraduate degree at Portland State, and he has a doctorate in anthropology from Temple University. He's worked at Harvard's W.E.B. Du Bois Institute, the Smithsonian's Museum of Natural History, Hopkins Institute for Global Studies, and many other places. He's worked on very interesting stuff on the politics of representation and race. And his most recent work is Anthropology and the Racial Politics of Culture. Lee is one of the great inspirations. We were going to do this course next year, and Lee said, why not pick up on Jonathan Foer's work and do it this year? And that was yet another Duke moment where I said, okay, let's go. And so we did it this spring, and that's because Lee has the energy and vision and insight to do that. If you don't know what he looks like, the man is over there. Franca Alphen is our nutritionist. Is Franca?
Yes.
There she is. Okay. This was also a wonderful idea to have somebody on board with us as we continue to think about food, to think about our everyday choices, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Franca is the Director of Nutrition Services at Student Health and assistant professor with the Department of Community and Family Medicine. And she is one of the 3 student health dietitians and has worked at Duke for over 20 years. And she comes to us, her education from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health and nutrition from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So she's one of those blended blues. We've got several of those blended blues around. She's also worked with individuals as well as amateur and professional sports teams. She has worked extensively with folks with eating disorders and thinking about messages of good health and nutrition in a variety of public venues. So not only does Duke bring you courses with their own librarians, which we're going to talk about in a second, but it also brings you courses with their own nutritionists. I think this is a first, actually. Kathy Lewis is the person that's really made this all happen. She is the Food Studies course administrator is her official title. She's been a Duke employee for over 6 years. And she is also a blended blue. She comes from UNC Chapel Hill undergrad. She was the assistant to the chair in romance studies before joining Team Trinity. And she's now the administrative assistant to Professor and Dean Lee Baker. And she runs the Graduation with Distinction, the Cardea Fellows Program, and the Honor Council, among many other things. And Kathy truly makes it all happen. She's hiding up there, too. But there she is. She's your And I'm going to turn it over very briefly to our final support team, Linda Daniels, who is our Daniel without an S. That's right. That's right. Yeah, Daniel without an S. And she's a research services librarian. Many of you are going to get a great lesson in how the university works in this class. For social scientists, that's each division of knowledge, the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities has their own librarian as well as sometimes sub-librarians. Her degree is from Duke, and she also has an MA in librarian science from UNC. And I had this other Duke moment when I was just going ahead in my everyday dean work when suddenly there appeared out of the blue, here's your course website. I had no idea that we had this angel that was working on the course website for us, and she is here to tell us a little bit about it. Welcome.
I'm very pleased to be the librarian for this course and hope that you will be comfortable if you are looking for resources for your research papers. If you need some help, I would be happy to assist you. And to show you some of the library resources, I created a research guide for you, and I want to show you where it lives on your Sakai site. So this is probably familiar to you. This is your site, your course site, and if you look down towards the bottom of the page, on the left-hand side, you'll see a link to the research guide. I'm going to just show you very quickly. The library really has a wealth of materials for you to use, and I have put some of these at your fingertips so that you can easily find materials for you to use. And you'll see it's actually arranged. It has tabs across the top. On the Getting Started page, it really is sort of an archive for this class. It has links to some readings and to the library copies of those readings at the bottom. You'll see that it also has some information about the speakers and their names are linked, so you can find out a little bit more about them if you need that information before the class. It really is a work in progress, so if you have information that you would like added to this, please feel free to contact me. My contact information, screen is a little. My contact information is over on the right-hand side. You'll see a link to my email. And email is probably the best way for you to contact me. I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one if you would like to have a research consultation in the library, or if you would just like some information sent to you by email, I'm happy to do that as well. You'll see at the top here that there's also tabs for finding research materials, and I've created some pages. And as you all know, since food is sort of integrated into all subjects, this really is a work in progress. I'll be adding to it. The format for each of these pages is pretty much the same, and you'll see on the right-hand side some links to some of the library databases, so if you're looking for articles for your papers. These are the names of some of the databases that I would recommend, and if you click on them, it'll take you right into them so you can search for articles. There are also, each page has a bit more information. If you're looking for statistics, some suggestions for that, as well as at the bottom of each page is some information, some additional reading from some materials that are actually in the library. I know that some of your focus is going to be on Duke and Durham, and on this page I've put links to some of the organizations that you might be interested in doing some research on, the Slow Food Movement in North Carolina, as well as the Cooperative Extension Society, as well as the Center for Environmental Agriculture and Fair Shares, you'll see over here. And some information about some resources actually at Duke. There's some dining facilities, sustainability information that's available in the Rubenstein Library. And at the top you'll see here that there is a link. There's a tab here specifically for the Rubenstein Library, which is the Special Collections Library, which is made up of different centers. There's a Women's Studies Center, a Film and Video Center, and Human Rights Center. And there's bits of information here as well as links to those different centers and some of the collections that they have that might be of interest to you. Elizabeth Dunn put some of this information together that I then put on the website, and her contact information is there. And she's a research services librarian in the Rubenstein Library, which is part of Perkins. It's off on one wing. So anyway, so that's just a really quick introduction to the research guide and to myself. So hopefully you'll be in touch, and I look forward to working with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so today's going to continue to be a little more orientation, discussion of how we're going to be doing things from here on out. Before we do that kind of basic stuff around the principles of the course, I want to ask, how many of you decided to take this class for a personal reason? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask. How many of you decided to take this class for a political reason? Okay. How many of you decided to take this class because food was being served? I said, everyone, you can be honest. And how many of you decided to take this class because it fulfilled a requirement? Okay, interesting. That's very, very helpful. There are probably many, many other reasons why you were interested in this class. Why I begin with this, and you wanted to see the kind of demographic for motivation for taking a class. It's what I call a demographic of interest in a class. I wanted to begin with that because we assume in this class that all of those interests and all of those motivations matter. That's the spirit of a university class. Let me take some time to give you and explain to you a little bit more about the 5 principles that motivate us in something like this very experimental class. The first is that we are integrative in our work. We are integrative in our work. What does that mean? It means that we are about finding a way in which our knowledge fits into the world. How our knowledge about food and the food, what we learn about food, including, I love those archives. I don't know, did you guys read those archives that were on there? The history of food strikes at Duke, dining services archives. Larry, did you know about those dining services archives? He's shaking his head. He's an honest man. That's fabulous stuff. So already we're realizing that the kinds of approaches to food that are going to be engaged in this class have a historical element, have a social element, have a personal element, have a labor relations element, have a spiritual element. And we are trying to find out how our knowledge fits into the world, how knowledge about food can be best used in the world and integrated into our personal and political and social lives. And we also, keeping with that principle of integration, number 1, are about integrating departments and perspectives, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later on. In our view, the best form of education is education that integrates you better into the world and gives you specialized knowledge that can fit into the world. And the best way to do that is to bring departmental and school perspectives together. We assume that policy matters. We assume that health matters. We assume that spirituality matters. We assume that society matters, history, environment, and so on. And in a way, you know, you'd hear this as a kind of everyday cliche all the time. But how many of us go out of our way to talk to each other and engage those different perspectives and integrate those different perspectives in our life? Not very often. So that's the first principle, integration. Second, which is related to this, is we are committed to being a university and not a multiversity. We're a multiversity because I hear all the time people saying, well, I wasn't trained in that, so I'm not going to ask any questions about that. What does that mean, I wasn't trained in that, so I'm not going to ask any questions about that? It means that your curiosity ends with your expertise. That's not a good way to be a university, if your curiosity ends with your expertise. It's much better to create an environment where we assume that other people's expertise is relevant to our lives. And we have no idea what that expertise is going to be yet. But we know, in some way or other, it's relevant to our lives. That's the second principle. Committed to being a university, not a multiversity. And I'm going to mention that as we continue with our conversations together. If I hear someone say, well, I don't know about public policy, so I'm not going to say anything about that, I'm going to say, oh, that's a multiversity statement, not a university statement. Principle number 3, what I call a necessary holism of perspectives. A necessary holism of perspectives. What I mean by that is that our being together as a university is not just something that's fun to do, because we like hearing what other people have to say, but rather it is necessary for today's world. It is no longer a matter of simply exchanging views, but if we don't have a world in which all perspectives matter, in what I will then talk about next, which is a clumsy solution, an integrative solution, where all majors matter and are equally important to us. It doesn't matter whether you are sciences, humanities, social sciences, engineering, public policy, you name it, your major counts. That's why we offer all of them in the way that we do. It's not only important, but without those multiple perspectives, we're not going to find a solution to the food crisis that faces us today, about which Kathy and Charlie are going to say a little bit more. Necessary holism of all perspectives. Principle number 5, what a wonderful book called Clumsy Solutions writes about all the time, which is that this book, by the way, the whole title of it is called Clumsy Solutions for a Complex World, Government, Politics, and Plural Perceptions. What is a clumsy solution? It's one that acknowledges and takes into consideration the point of view of any position, any group or organization or nation, and how they act when they're making decisions or establishing new policy. There is no single answer. There's no single silver bullet. Rather, there is a clumsy combination of several different answers. And that's the only way we're going to be able to deal with things like global warming, with things like local food movements and the inability of the planet to feed itself. That principle is very important because when things get clumsy and messy, they can get frustrating in a world of academia where we like elegant solutions. My perspective is it's the moral prerogative of a university to be clumsy, to bring people together in the way that we've been talking about, plural perceptions. So that's principle number 4. And principle number 5, the last principle, is what I call the pedagogical commons. Pedagogical commons. Pedagogy, as many of you already know, means to teach, is the area of teaching and education. And the pedagogical commons is one where, as professors, and the professors that come in and out of this class and will join with you on any number of perspectives, legal, environmental, and so on, we also assume that our professional expertise is relevant to the classroom at all times. We have no idea what Jeff Purdy, who's a professor in law, is going to speak about. He has an article up on your new website, by the way. But I'm going to assume before he walks in the room that what he has to say is relevant to me somehow, and that it is my obligation as a learner to understand what he says as relevant to me, and to find out what that relevance is. That's what we mean by pedagogical commons. And so as professors, we're committed to that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you as students work together in this great experimental course a little bit later on. But I wanted to end with those 5 principles, talk a little bit now before turning it over to Kathy and Charlie about why food for me, why food is so important, and then we'll move on to the logistics of the class. I think there are 2 reasons why food matters and why we're taking this up as a topic and continuing the summer reading. The first is because we want to answer very particular kinds of questions. At a time when technology does allow us to feed ourselves on the planet many times over, why are people starving? It's a simple question. Do we have an answer? At a time when a sense of place is less and less important to the work of the world, why is it that a sense of place is emerging as more and more important to the human spirit? And how does food play into that sense of place? And finally, how can we, working together with industry and farmers, create a new and different relationship between energy and food? Those are the 3 questions that I bring, and I think all of us bring. Social, pressing, personal, political, policy, spiritual question to this class. And the second reason why I think food is so important is because collectively we should be interested in everyday culture. And food is about as everyday as you can get. We make decisions about everyday culture when we decide what to eat. We do it at least 3 times a day. For me, it's about 10 times a day. And the early Indian texts that I study, called the Upanishads, say that everything in the world, both the concrete wisdom of trees and the spiritual wisdom of souls, comes from and goes back to food. That we exist in an eternal and constantly shifting symbiosis between the eater and the eaten. Even then, in 900 BCE, people were aware of the everyday decisions about food and how they affected the larger imbalance or balance of the world. And this course will give us a chance to reflect on that very common fact and to use those everyday decisions differently in our lives. So with that, I will turn it over to Charlie.
Thank you very much, Laurie. It's a great honor to be part of this experiment and to work on these issues that I care so much about with people who are doing a great job of making this happen. Thank you all. I won't go through each of your names again, and to the TAs who we'll hear from as well. As you may have glanced and saw, I have loaded this paper that I wrote on the Sakai site. I'm not going to do it all in the interest of trying to have more time for you to meet your TAs, to go upstairs and meet one another, who all of you will be part of discussion groups as I'll describe. But let me give you a little bit of what I have written in this paper that I call Where the Next Meal Comes From. First, I want you to tell me how many of you have been actively engaged before in the production of food that has something to do with the livelihood of your family. Oh, okay, maybe 6. Okay, and building on what Laurie has already said, how many of you have eaten today? Oh, 100%, can we say? Maybe someone's fasting. So as we go through the semester, I want us all to remember this contrast between the two numbers of people, the 6, roughly 6% we'll say, and the 100%. I think 6% is very interesting that we have that many. As we're served meals, sitting next week in a climate-controlled environment, listening, having listened to lectures on food, let's realize that only a few people in earlier societies were able to do this kind of activity as the masses toiled away in fields, wondering if they would live through the winter. In no other time in the history of the globe have people been fed so well. Notice that here I speak of a select group of us. For today, out of the 7 billion people on the planet, 1/7 of us, 1 billion, didn't have adequate food today. Hunger, starvation. But, as already has been said, not from the lack of adequate calories being produced on the planet, but it's about distribution, about war and international disputes. It's about politics of distribution more than it is about adequate global production. What wealth we have. I was just at Gilbert Adams' dorm earlier, where I happen to live. And I thought about this. Students call up Jimmy John's and have them Jimmy John's haul a sub sandwich to them, just one sandwich, in a gas-powered vehicle to their door. Anytime we want, we can have food seemingly fall out of the sky. Yeah. We sense, all of us, that even in our plenty, some would call it waste, that there's a certain poverty in not knowing where that food originates. A poverty of mind and body that comes from separation from soil, from a lack of the use of the body to produce something tangible, from the loss of community surrounding food production. Many crave something more. But sometimes this craving takes the form of nostalgia for the good old days of agriculture. Nostalgia that's a distinctly modern wish, a product of history, I would add. I have to tell you my opinion. There were no good old days of agriculture to which we want to return. Though Thomas Jefferson and Thoreau and Wendell Berry and many others in their different ways have wanted us to cling to or perhaps go back to a simpler past, to return there would mean facing again indigenous genocide, the misery of slavery, colonialism, wars over territory, all that mixed in with any kind of bucolic scenes that we would find of people producing their own food in communities where everyone's happy. The problem is we can't cherry pick from the past or the present, for that matter. If we seek liberty and justice and the pursuit of happiness for all in the food system, then we have to forge ahead and not back to find our dream of a more perfect agriculture and food supply. Now I'm going to skip about 5 pages in which I summarize 10,000 years of agriculture. So if you want to read about that, go to the website. Not required reading, but I'd like for you to see it. And I'll end with some thoughts about this class. Today, a recharged locavore movement. Loca, local, vor, meaning coming from the same word that voracious, devour, to eat. Eating local. Slow food, a groundswell of food awareness, build on all of these ideas. Those of us who've worked in food and farming for decades, like me, I've even been a farmer, are amazed at the recent growth of awareness. The literature is overwhelming. This course is just one of the results. All of you signed up within 30 minutes. That says something about growing awareness. And some of you are still trying to sign up. We're sorry. But don't let the victory bells sound yet. Today, there are more prisoners in U.S. prisons than there are farmers in the U.S. Food deserts, rural and urban, exist in the land of plenty. Indeed, every one of us must still rely on the burning of huge quantities of oil in order to eat. African American and other minority farm owners have dwindled to a minute percentage of the total in this country. Millions of animals continue to live in confinement. Pesticides and fertilizers pollute. Corporations continue to produce a vast majority of our food. The words organic, natural, even local have been usurped by some of the same corporations that brought us convenience foods before. Though 2 billion farmers out of the 7 billion of us, 2 billion people are engaged in agriculture, most of them live on just a few dollars a day. Genetically modified foods have upped the ante for all of us concerned about the science of food, with science claiming to feed the world, even as advocates for family farms fear corporate control of all of food production and a science that may not be tested enough. More genies are about to be released out of the bottles, and already much of our food is making us sick. Though we have more food than our ancestors would have ever dreamed and a lot more leisure time, many of us believe availability for some of us isn't enough. First, we want to know who and what has to be sacrificed to make this plenty possible, to build relationships through food and get involved in making change. We join a growing course of people who want to know more to make eating an ethical as well as a gustatory act. So let us give thanks for food and for the privilege to stop and hash out what food means to us. We are here for ourselves and for those who cannot stop to ask. They're too busy wondering where the next meal comes from. We too, in another way, because of privilege, perhaps, want to know the same thing. Where does that next meal come from? So let us turn to how we're going to do this, to find out some of this. In the syllabus, does anybody still need a copy of the syllabus? Okay, there's some great prose here that I will not read, that Kathy, Rudy, and others have worked on. The main focus of this statement here is that we are trying to find out the meaning of locavorism and what that movement means. We're going to hear from many different speakers. The structure of the course is that we'll hear from some different lecturer from one of the different parts of our university each week with respondents, and readings will go with those. Each of you will be responsible for doing the readings, coming to class, and if you'll turn to the second page of the syllabus, under evaluation, I want to summarize what we expect back from you so that you can be full participants in this experiment. All of you will be required to post a reflection on Sakai in response to Dean Patton's statement of the week, Franca Alphen's statement of the week on nutrition, or simply to your smaller discussion group, which you're going to meet shortly. There are going to be 12 or so of you in each discussion group, and you can post to one another. And some people may then, after posting in a small group, post to the entire one. So we need you to be here. It's required that you be here every session. We're only meeting 13 times. So we need you to be here, and your oral participation in discussions in those small groups and in the large would be great, but required in the small. So if you're missing a class, this is going to actually affect your grade for even just one class. So prior to arriving at each class, we want you to have done the readings and to post something to one of these discussion groups. And it doesn't have to be huge, but it has to be a significant thought about the readings and so forth. Then you're going to hear the lecture while you're here and the responses to it, to all of those lectures. And you'll then have 24 hours in which to take a quiz. We call them weekly tests on the syllabus to get your attention. But they're quizzes, each the total of which counts 30%. So you do the math. Just a few percentage points per quiz, but the quizzes will be based on what's said here and the readings. So you might post about something that is what you found at the farmer's market that may not be exactly what you read, and we'd like to hear your thoughts, but we definitely will be quizzing you on what you read, whether you wrote about that or not. Does that make sense? Okay, and then finally, in the middle of the term and at the end of the term, we're asking that you write short papers, 4 to 6 pages each, and that's where this wonderful library website comes in. And we as resource people will be here to help you with topics that you want to get more deeply engaged in. And then finally, the graduate and professional students may have additional requirements that have nothing to do with what goes on in here that you are working with your advisor on. You know who your advisor is already, and your grade comes from them and us. So the syllabus is self-explanatory after that, I think. Next week, we are reading the only required book for this course. It's called Plenty, published in 2008. It's available at the university bookstore if you've not already known that. And so you have to read that book by the 24th. It's not difficult reading, but you have to get on it. And so in the next week, this will give you a good sense of how the whole semester is going to work. You will be ready, having done the readings here, and also these readings on local food and is local food better. As you'll find out, these are just only a few pages each in a popular journal, so they're not difficult. But you won't be able to answer the quiz questions if you don't read them. So you'll have that prepared and have your response ready by the time the lecturer steps up to the lectern next week, who's Dennis Clements of the Duke Health Systems, and then the respondent will be Brenda Brody, and we'll also hear from Emily Sloss. So you see how it works. And then we'll go on through the semester with a similar kind of pattern, with introductions of those speakers, and as you'll see, as Dean Patton already outlined, there are people representing all parts of the university who are coming to speak to us, and we're very excited about it. Some of them we don't know. Some of them, indeed, we might not even agree with. That doesn't matter. We want to hear from them and learn from them, and through the discussion and the responses to them, we'll learn a lot. And then, of course, after you hear from them here, you're all going upstairs to eat a meal that is based on the discussion topics of the day. And you'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. I'm curious myself exactly what kinds of foods we're going to eat when the GM foods discussion happens.
We're eating GM food.
We're eating GM food? Well, what does that mean, and how does that look? Does it look like, do they serve it in a test tube? No.
Can't wait for the posters.
So we're going to hear about environmental policy. We're hearing about agrarianism, inventing the family farm, rethinking the role of gender, sexuality, and agrarianism in alternative food movements. Some very philosophical, ethical questions will come up, and we'll introduce these speakers and the topics each week. I won't go into that right now in the interest of saving some time for your discussion. But are there any questions about this? Yes?
If you are unable to attend the class for a reason, is there going to be a video posted online?
Kathy Lewis, do we have, is this all being filmed now?
It is being filmed. You are being filmed. We haven't yet. It will be available, but there will be a delay. So.
Right. So.
It won't be a simulcast.
Right. We understand that sometimes people are sick. This is but this has been our policy, and so that attendance is required. Oral participation is encouraged, as it says. So, yes.
Just to interrupt for a sec. A couple of things. One is the discussion sections will not be filmed.
Correct.
Just to
Only
be-
the lecture.
Yeah, just to be really clear about that, because we want to make sure people feel free to engage in any number of tough conversations, and filming tends to inhibit one.
So apparently this camera comes on a few minutes before class starts and cuts off a few minutes after, and I've already told myself, don't say any of those comments in the front of the room that you might not want anybody to hear after class is over. But no, just joking. But so I think that's it for the syllabus. Thank you. Yes. Oh wait, one more question.
The question about the weekly test, the post on Sahai, I didn't see where it said like when we had to have it in.
Okay, it will be 24 hours that you have from the time of the class. And these will be multiple choice questions. These will not require a lot of writing. If you've done the readings, you could probably whip it out in a half hour, I would guess. And where the where will you post?
Yeah.
You can post anywhere you want, as long as it's at the start, done by the start of class.
Okay.
And so there are 3 different sites in Sakai.
There might be 5 soon, though. Other people might start them, and there might be a whole variety of places you can post. You said to post once per week before the start of class.
And the good news is that your TAs will be able to search by your name to see how many posts you've done, wherever they are. So they won't have to search all the places. They can just search by your name. And they'll see all of them wherever they are. Yes?
I just checked the book today, and I think they're sold out. Do you know if we didn't get any more? Or?
They shouldn't be sold out. We ordered 110 copies. Go over there.
So you were already there, or you went,
Okay, maybe it's.
you looked online?
Maybe it's in different sections of the bookstore. And
Could be.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Or we might, is it a possibility that we have people buying for the class who are not in class?
They're
We believe they are there.
Be in touch with us if they're not.
Okay.
So Kathy Rudy.
Thanks, Charlie. One thing I wanted to add to this is the design of the class as being Patton conceived it is that we're having mostly professional schools come in to give the primary lecture and having professors and people from within arts and science respond to them. This is really going to increase the dialogue so that it's not like, oh, this is the law week, this is the PBS week, this is the medicine week. All of the people giving, or most of the people giving the first lecture are from professional schools, which is very exciting for you undergrads because you don't really have access to them in any other way. So Charlie and I are supposed to do sort of trailers for the class, and this will be the 10-minute TV spot. I'm going to say some of the same things he said, but I'm going to turn him a little bit differently to give you a sense of what the debates you're going to be having in your small groups and hearing in the larger lecture are going to be about. The first, which Charlie very clearly articulated, is the local versus the industrial food. That's the hot button issue in food studies right now. On one side, people argue local tastes better, it doesn't use as much fuel, it maintains connection to your territory, to your area. The industrial says that they are better because they're not bound by season, they have high production for very limited human labor, and it's the only way to guarantee feeding 7 billion people is to grow industrially. Alongside of that debate, it's not the same debate, is the question of organic versus conventional. It should be noted that Rachel Carson, who hopefully every one of you read Silent Spring in high school, that book was published 50 years ago this month. And so the organic side of the question is explained by Richard Carson in DDT and all the harms to the environment. The conventional people, and thanks to Laurie, we're bringing some really cool pro-conventional people into the class to give you a very different side of this. They argue that this debate about organics is silly because all of the harmful chemicals like DDT are off the market anyway, and that there's no oversight, that trying to support organic over some of these chemicals is really a very useless endeavor. We need some of the chemicals to grow food cheaply. Alongside that, and again, not the same thing, is genetically modified food versus non-GM food. And again, due to our connections in various schools, we're bringing people in who are we're bringing one person in particular, I think is very interesting, who argue that GM is the exact same as hybridization, and that we actually really, really need genetic modification in order to get vitamins, in order to get certain kinds of food on the market and alleviate world hunger. Of course, the anti-GM people call it frankenfoods. It was a big article last week in Atlantic Monthly. They feel that it's dangerous and cross-pollination could destroy all the crops in an area, et cetera, et cetera. These same debates happen on plants and then also on animals. So the first debate you're going to encounter, and they're going to be not separated out by week. We're going to be talking about these things in small groups and in lectures simultaneously. Pastured versus CAFO meat, and the pro-local people say pasture is the best, it avoids animal suffering, better for soil to use closed systems. The pro-CAFO, the industrial people say there is no way we can eat the amount of meat we are eating unless we keep animals in sheds. And they note that the cost of pastured meat is at least 5 times higher than CAFO meat. 5 times, not 50%, 5 times. 99-cent chicken breast, CAFO meat, $12.99 at the farmer's market. Similarly to this, whether animals are grown without drugs, which is and is not called organic, it's very complicated and we'll try to explain it, versus prophylactic antibiotics and hormones. Clearly the people who are, thanks Charlie.
I'm going to write CAFO.
Oh yeah, confined
Thank
animal
you.
feeding operation. That is what we have in Eastern North. Part of the reason this class is so cool, I don't know how many native North Carolinians do we have? Any? Okay, quite a few. We got out of tobacco in this state very quickly by becoming the second highest hog producers in the nation. And this all happened 15, 20 years ago. All of Eastern North Carolina is CAFO operations of Smithfield hogs. And they have altered the shape of our state. And so we'll talk a lot about that. We're actually going to read the Pulitzer Prize winning story, Boss Hog, that came out in the mid-90s around what happened in North Carolina with CAFOs. All CAFO animals need prophylactic antibiotics because they're living in conditions that are so contaminated they would get sick and die before they could be brought anywhere close to market weight. So we're giving 70% of our antibiotics to animals in this country. The product of that is all these superbugs, MRSA, and these antibiotic-resistant bacteria are produced as a result of the CAFOs. The pro-locals say that it avoids animal suffering, better for soil, they don't need antibiotics and hormones. The pro-CAFO people, and we're going to have some of those in here too, argue that there's no way you can have cheap meat without antibiotics and hormones. That the dairy industry, for example, exists because of rapid bovine growth hormone. Otherwise, there wouldn't be enough milk to make most of the products in the supermarket. Again, I'm racing through this. This is only the trailer. We've got the whole semester to go through this. One of the things I think is the most interesting hot point around food and animals these days is the question of cloning and genetically modified food. The argument, of course, for the natural people is animals deserve a good and healthy life, especially if we're going to kill them for meat. Natural meat is healthier for humans and better for the planet. A whole bunch of people these days are into this thing called disenhancements, where you're genetically modifying animals to be blind or to not have sense of smell or to not be at all aggressive. And the argument is if we're putting them in close quarters to raise them for cheap meat, why not make their lives easier by making them blind or by making them less aggressive or by making them shutting off their sensory organs of smell. All these things that are so difficult for animals living close together. Indeed, one of the big papers of the disenhancement movement is written by someone from our law school, and we're hoping still to bring her in to talk about disenhancements. They argue argue, the pro-GM people the pro-cloning GM people for animals, that they argue that domestic animals are not natural in the first place. You don't find pigs and chickens and cows in nature. We made them. Why not use our technology to make them better? Finally, the big debate that we will have, I'm sure, in many, many classes is vegan versus vegetarian versus meat. And this meat eating, or omnivore. This will bring us back to Jonathan Safran Foer. Those of us who have followed Foer's career know that he wrote the book as a vegetarian. When he came here, he argued both and spoke at the first day of school in September. He argued both for veganism and for local meat eating. These are really complicated issues. It was Cesar Chavez, though, who argued that vegetarianism is possibly the least moral way of eating because the egg and dairy industries are produce the most harm for the most animals. And Cesar said, if you want to help animals, either be a vegan or only eat meat and avoid eggs and dairy. So we've got lots of interesting problems to work on. Some of it's very counterintuitive, some of it led by Foer, and we will have these all semester. What's going to happen after Laurie finishes, we're pretty committed to getting out of this room in every week somewhere between an hour and 75 minutes, so that you have somewhere between 75 and 90 minutes to eat and meet in your small groups. That's the goal of the class. So I'm rushing forward. What's going to happen when Laurie finishes us out tonight is you are going to go upstairs one floor to the refectory and meet in your small group. There you are going to meet with your TA. I'm going to introduce the TAs to you now just very quickly. They'll do a better job of introducing themselves in a small group. How do you know which small group you're in? We've posted 6 or 8 small group lists outside this room. So as soon as we're finished, you've got to find your name on a list and go to the corresponding table upstairs for that small group. Any questions? Cool. So our great TAs, we're really excited about working with all of them. They're wonderful. To start is Kate Auerbach. Kate, and she's been just wonderful helping us set up the website. It was thanks to her we sort of moved to Sakai. Bridget Fletcher is our AV person for this class, as well as having a small group. Brooke Fodor is a senior writing her senior honors thesis on eating disorders and anorexia. Jim Luther, right here, is a former Mal student who wrote a master's degree on environmental ecology, I'll call it, in Chesapeake Bay, especially on crabs. Funny topic, but nonetheless, great thesis. Heather Mallory, Heather, where are you? Actually has a PhD in food from Duke's Romance Studies. Tiff Shao is one of my undergrads, a senior, and took my food class last year, and I sort of thought she was really wonderful. Carrie Sweet Harbinson is also a former student who loved working on food. And finally, Cynthia Wang, who I don't know very well yet. She's one of Charlie's students. You will meet your TA in about 20 to 30 minutes upstairs in the refectory. Thank you.
Okay, so now we've got a really great taste. I've learned about 4 or 5 new vocabulary words. I'm going to try disinfectant on my house tonight. See how we respond. Before we go further, I wanted to, before we go upstairs, I wanted to end by talking a little bit about what I call an ethics of conversation. As you can probably figure out, I'm very interested, and everyone else here is very interested in the everyday and everyday culture. And that includes how people interact in discussion groups and how people interact in a very experimental course like this. So we are about to move into our discussion groups for the first time. And so here's a little bit of an orientation. How do people talk to each other in a radically interdisciplinary environment with different levels and ideas? What we're doing in this class, I've had arguments with people in a variety of educational contexts that I've been in my life that say, you can't do this, nor should you do this. We don't want to mix undergrads with grads. We don't want to mix people who have expertise in 3 different areas. We don't want to have all the different professors coming together. It's too incoherent, it's too confusing, the educational levels are going to be hard to manage and negotiate. And we actually are all building on the premise that this is untrue. So before we begin moving any further, let's just ask, how many of you are from Trinity? Lots, okay. How many of you are from Pratt? Okay, good, wonderful, welcome. How many of you are from the law school? We did have 1, 2, no, all right, we're going to have professors from the law school. How many of you are from Sanford? School of Public Policy, good, welcome. How many of you are from Nicholas? Okay, great, over here as well. All right, good, and any from medicine or nursing? I don't think we have any because their curriculum is so intense.
Divinity.
And divinity, how many of you are from divinity? Okay, good, several from divinity, wonderful. All right, and Fuqua, how many of you from Fuqua? Okay, good, great. All right, so notice the diversity in this class just in terms of institutional affiliation. You're going to have the same kind of diversity as Kathy mentioned. We're going to have ideological diversity in this class. We're going to have professional diversity in this class. We're going to have, how many of you are first-year students? That's right, all seniors, that's right, you're all seniors, yeah. That was one of our conversations. So we don't quite have as many different levels as we might in another class, but we've still got a lot of different levels. Many of you are in the midst of a journey of professional formation where all you care about is getting the vocabulary of your profession down. That is your life's work right now. Others of you are seniors where all you care about is getting the best general vocabulary you can for a variety of different topics. Many of you have really different educational aims. But notice that the breadth of educational aims in this class is also something, and the specificity of educational aims in this class still brought you to this class. So here's part of our social contract together. In those discussion groups, you are going to be held to a higher standard of behavior and conversation and sociability and intellectual rigor than you would in other classes. Why? I'm going to give you, I'm not only giving a list of 5, I don't know why I keep coming up with a list of 5s, but just as I gave you 5 principles of the class, there are 5 principles of what I call an ethics of conversation for this. First of all, number 1, all conversation should be in service of the whole. That's part of that necessary holism that I was talking about earlier. That means as you think about your contributions to class, what he said, or the more eloquent equivalent of what he said, or I agree with that, okay, that's good. I'm glad that you're creating a sort of sense of, who agrees with who. But you need to think about whether your contribution actually moves the conversation forward collectively. That's really important. That means you need to develop the confidence and the sense of self-respect in your own thinking to be able to do that well. All conversation should be in service of the whole. I think there's a corollary to what I just said, though, because we are holding you to a higher standard, and I don't want to put the fear of God into all of you. Oh my God, I'm not going to open my mouth. One of the things I say in every single class is there are no stupid questions. There are only questions that reveal that you haven't done the reading. So, and I mean that completely and totally. If you've done the reading, everything is open. You may have missed something in the reading, so what? We don't assume total download of the reading. What we want is a high level of engagement. Maybe that should be principle number 6. Okay, number 2, you have expertise that others don't. Own that, be responsible for it, celebrate it, do not lord it over others. What you have a responsibility to do is explain it well. Fuqua students are going to coming with skills in market analysis, in statistical regressions of businesses, you name it. Law students or people thinking about pre-law who are in Trinity. Engineering students coming with a whole understanding of what concept design is. Every single one of you is going to come with a special vocabulary. If your major is sociology, if your major is anthropology, if your major is religion, if your major is biology, whatever it is, you now have a special vocabulary. Your job is not to begin to talk about that. Okay, here's an example. Well, I mean, Kathy, I get what you're saying, but nobody really understands the soteriological equivalent of omnivore behavior in all forms of religions, right? What kind of a comment is that? Is that going to help any of you in any way? Obviously not, even Kathy. I thought I liked this scheme, but now she's a little off. Okay, but the important thing is, if you are saying or using words that you think people may not understand, because you've got that knowledge, then stop and explain what that is. It's really simple, but it's so important to do. Because everybody knows what it's like to be in a class where there's a person who loves to say what they know but never explain what they know. And it doesn't feel great for the social fabric of the conversation. Right? So, and also to be confident about what you know. So there will be times, and it's something that we've talked about a little bit in our conversations, and I know the TAs are ready to do that. If you hear, TAs, if you hear a word that people are using that you think other people may not know, stop, let us know what you mean by that. Explain that for everybody. So you share a common vocabulary. So that's number 2. Number 3, you will not have expertise that others do in this university, not multiversity course. You will not have expertise that others do. That means you have a responsibility to ask. Just like with your expertise, you have a responsibility to explain in simple language what you're talking about. So too, you have a responsibility to ask. There's nothing worse than sort of sitting there and listening to people not know what they're talking about. There's a wonderful short story by a great writer who's I'm a great fan of, Robertson Davies, who talks about the professorial nod, where you're just sitting there with no idea what the person's talking about. You just look on your face and say, yeah, sure. Right? So that can be oppressive after a while if all we're doing is that. Ask. If you don't know, ask. There are no stupid questions. There are only questions that we really haven't done with. Okay, that's principle number 3. 4, embrace of civil discourse. This is a huge value that I love to talk about all the time. Because I did a whole series of workshops at Emory where I was on when civil discourse breaks down. And it was really fun to think about what are the moments, what happens in the academy, in our professional lives. Your commitment, our collective commitment to civil discourse means, and I'm going to be real specific here, that we, back to that principle number 1 about all conversations should be in service of the whole, that we have a commitment to helping others make their argument better. Right? When you want to argue with someone, that's great. Argue with someone not because, you know, that cartoon where 2 people are supposedly listening to each other and the balloon says, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, right? That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in, if I disagree with Charlie about something, my commitment to him as a human being is to help him make his argument better by challenging it. Right? That's our social contract in this class. Sarcasm, eye-rolling, yes, we all see eye-rolling, derisive tone, all that kind of stuff. Check it at the door. But do find a way to be rigorous, challenging, humorous. All those are definitely what we want to encourage. And we believe in this class that there are ways in which you can maintain your commitment and relationship with whoever it is you're talking to and push them to the next level. So, I totally disagree. That you could start with that perhaps, and then you might move to tell me what you mean by X, explain a little more about Y. You need to maintain that commitment to engagement and conversation because people are going to help you make your argument better, whatever that is. And that's the final thing that I just mentioned, which is how do we begin to maintain our commitment to the common learning endeavor? We do so by the principle of being a learning community. And this is a new concept in higher education for the last, I'd say, certainly 10 years or 15 years. Nancy Shapiro has written a lot on this, that we are a community of learners. I might be a senior learner or have read a few more books than you, but most of you have read books about things that I will never, ever read any books about. So we are a community of learners. We occasionally will have to be in the role of a teacher, but as you can tell from what Charlie and Kathy both shared with us, they are also learning and trying to figure out the debates. They definitely have opinions, but they're continuing to figure out the debates in the films they make, in the books they write. The TAs, exactly the same thing. So, principle number 6, commitment to the learning community. And I think if we can instantiate all these principles, we will, I think, instantiate the university in a whole new way. So that's where I'll end, to invite you to instantiate the university in a whole new way. And we will then move now upstairs.
And I think that, don't forget to look for your name out there. We probably won't go full-time till 7 o'clock, but it's up to the TAs how much intro they want to do with the group. So if you see another group leaving early, don't presume that you can.
And if you are among the waitlisted, please check with us. Your names won't be on the list with TAs.
Yeah, these. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.